what we got on. Okay. Um, uh, this is Tawhid, Spiritual Unity of the Three Principles, and it looks like we've got the times all mixed up, but we're going to take the opportunity to just have an intimate talk with Rob about the way he sees life. The topic is racism, but we can go anywhere we want within that type of context. And it allows us to have an intimate conversation with him. The reason I put this title on for Tawhid was because I've grown up as a Jewish person, and I never really took to it. And my best friend was Black, Rob, in Winnipeg. We're very unusual. There are not many, like in the States, there's lots of Black people, but in Canada, only in the East is there quite a few. But he was one of two that was maybe in Winnipeg. And we were best friends. We were the best athletes. And his dad, I would always go over to their house. And his dad was always just super pleased that I showed up, and they gave me food, and we just had a great time. And I just loved going over there. And of course, we were just two kids having a good time with the parents loving us to be there. It was never really a concept that he was, I mean, he had a darker skin, but we were athletes. We were, and when we raced, Rob, I made sure we were the two fastest guys in the school, and I could beat him by that much every time because I was that mean. And he, but then we had this experience where he put on the boxing gloves, which I was kind of naive about, and I found out I didn't like that as much as I liked the type of experience. But the ability for people of different cultures and different ways to come together in love and fun and enjoyment, it's so much at my heart. And Omar and I represent something. He's a 27-year-old Muslim man living in Casablanca, and I'm a 75-year-old man in Canada. And we don't talk about that. And Rob, in the early days in Salt Spring, it was mostly white. To be honest, it was. And there was one Muslim. His name was Hafiz Bimji, and he was married to a Sikh, which is very unusual. Those two don't get along. And the outstanding feature of that, Amy, was that Hafiz and I were very close friends, and we have never once talked about Muslim and Jewish. We are just human beings the whole time, because that was the feeling in Salt Spring Island, Rob. It was, we were into truth. Truth had no room for all of that stuff. And so we didn't experience individuality of races or religion or things like that. And being around Sid, it was a spiritual journey, and the spiritual feeling didn't have room for that stupid stuff. It just didn't have any room for it. And so it was not part of our existence. But an interesting evolution happened, Rob. Roger Mills was the first psychologist to come to Salt Spring. And he was different than what's around now, way different. He was community oriented.
Yeah.
And within that, he got shunned by the 3P community in Florida, and he was kind of desolate and on his own. And someone came and had a small grant, and that grant was for Modelo. And he went into this guy he's got a suit, a sports jacket, a tie. He doesn't look that cool, and it's not the type that would appeal to the hang loose Black crowd or Hispanic crowd and so on. And all of a sudden 3P had maybe 25, 30% Black people, Hispanic people. And they brought a life to it. The Modelo women were like dynamite. And they were so much higher than the rest. The rest of us were boring, staid, and they were alive with the spirit, stinking with spirit and appreciation and so on. And then it kind of died out. It went more towards money, making a living, and they disappeared. I always felt that was a big mistake. Sid would not have approved of that. He loved the underprivileged and the different cultures and different ways of being and so on. And
when you say it, help me. I'm sorry, Harry. When you say it disappeared, help me understand, just so I can follow better.
Well, it became a white trip.
Tracking. Okay.
The dominant race trip.
Okay.
Where the money was the controlling factor.
Okay.
And where people wanted, where the psychological expression of the principles were highlighted, and people were attracted to solving their problems and making money, type of thing.
Okay.
And then diversity became a big issue. More and more people noticed it. At 1,000 people at the conference, Omar said he looked around and there were 2 people of different, and he says, he was one of them, and he went, this doesn't seem right. It seems like Sid was talking about it's for everyone. It's for everything. Yeah. And then they had this feeling of diversity that came out through the 3PGC, which really shocked them. And they had to open up to it. And then we had that beautiful diversity talk that you were the host for, and it really opened up fresh new feelings and new things.
Yeah.
But so the first question I have for you and we'll get into your story, Rob, and stuff, is, has that petered out again, or is that growing?
That's a very good question, because I literally was asked this question the other day. So for most people, there was at least in the United States, there was a conscious shifting or moving of the way they looked at race as a result of the George Floyd incident.
Absolutely.
And while that was the case for majority of the people experiencing it, I had a different experience. I had an experience where I cried because I remember a time when I was deployed that I turned my back to allow an American soldier to do something to someone in their country that I really didn't agree with, but I wasn't going to out him against us versus them out here at war. Like, I didn't agree with what he was doing. So rather than partake and participate, I'll just turn my back. But I didn't use my voice to say stop. So when I saw the George Floyd incident, I was so hurt because I saw in me when I failed to use my voice. And so it was way past a race thing for me. It was a humanity thing. And so my experience has always been Black. I'm 44 years old. That's been my whole experience. So I've seen the world through the lens of, me being Black. So I've been through moments or catalysts, whether it was Rodney King in the early 90s or whatever, where things happen and then there is a seemingly nice shift and then things go back. I've seen that real. This is the first time in my experience, mine, that I have not saw a regression in the conscious level and the willingness to go get more. I've not saw a regression. I actually see it sprouting out into more where I'm being encouraged to go even deeper and farther to find fresh voices no one has ever heard of, to highlight different experiences. I am, and for me, the difference in a politically correct or a public relations shift or move and what's true on conscious level shift is time and action. I am watching committee upon committees get created of communitizing, bringing everybody back to the essence of us talking about it being one universal mind, us having thought as our creative power and being conscious of that. The basics, back to the basics, back to the essence of us being all human beings. I'm seeing us challenge where over the years we may not have looked at how we say certain things, how we address certain people groups, how we may not have been a thing. May not have been. I'm pretty sure, Harry, when you were coming up, there was shit you could say or stuff you could say, I'm sorry, that you can't say now. Or if you say now, it's completely frowned upon. That's just because the way the society has changed. We're talking about a universal truth, but we're communicating to people. We got to, I won't say got to because there's no have. It should be at least be presented in a manner in which they can digest or receive. And some of that is going to be speaking their language. And how do I best speak the language of society as they're hurting and I want to help heal them? Listening to the many voices that sound similar to their story, as well as to listening to my own. So for me, no, it hasn't dwindled down a bit. I'm watching people come alive, challenging any and everything that excludes someone from being able to express their human experience. So I am truly, truly passionate about it. And you know me, yeah, I wouldn't be a part of it if it wasn't. And I'm not afraid to say that. I'm not afraid to say that, hey, no, we're just over here talking crap. Like, I'm not afraid to say that if that's what it is. But no, I'm watching things happen. So, yeah.
I want to just add a couple things outside of your reach. You know that I have a lot of indigenous connections, and and Black Lives Mattered really impacted the indigenous community. It empowered them because they saw that if Black people could speak out against the dominant race, so it had that domino effect. And it had the same domino effect for the Muslims because they're probably right now the most severely prejudiced group people at them right now. They're the misunderstood. They dress differently. They have different, and they've been categorized as terrorists and so on. But all that Black Lives Mattered and the stories you told me that empowered the Black community also empowered all the minority communities because they have also experienced severe prejudice.
But that's because of my belief that there's only one misunderstanding. You knowing who you are. Period. That's been the biggest limiting factor of my entire life. Yes, I'm Black. I'm pretty sure I've been into some things that were racially motivated or driven. I grew up poor. Yes, I did not have the best of anything. So I sold a little drugs to make a little more. All of that. None of that limited me more than the misunderstanding of knowing who I am. That's why you could take it and make it not just Black. You could insert women fighting for their rights. You can insert LGBTQ community fighting for their rights. You could take and peel the label off and keep the people and put a totally different label on and still get the same. It's what happened when you shun a voice. When a voice feels shunned, no matter what. I was on the program, Harry, the other day, and everywhere I go, I want everybody to speak. So I loved when you said, Amy, be a part of the conversation, because I was going to at least have Amy make a comment or something, because I'm about all voices being heard. So on the program, there was a few people asked the questions, and I started going around and I was like, hey, at least let me hear your voice. You don't have to have a question, but I just need to see your box light up and you say hi, and I can say I love you or something, so every voice gets heard. And I go through all, there's about 30 some people on the call. And my computer screen, I thought had everybody. And the host of the call says, "Oh, we got one more." Because I was starting to wrap up and I was talking. And she says, "Oh, we got one more." And she calls the lady. And the lady said, "Wow." She said, "In just that moment, Rob," she said, "but I caught myself. But in that moment, I felt everything about, wait, why didn't I get a chance to, like, why didn't he ask me what's wrong?" In just that quick of a second of me just saying people just to say hi. Now, and the funny part was she didn't want to say anything either in the first place. She came into the call not wanting to say anything. But when I gave opportunity for everybody to speak and she felt excluded, that made her feel a certain way. And we got a chance to talk about that. And it was just a mistake of me not seeing it on the screen. But it was so pointing to, that's anyone when they feel like they aren't heard, even if they want to say something or not. And so when I woke up to that, I mean, for me, it was what the principles point to. So I can have a conversation about racism, but it's going to fall back to me pointing you to your humanity. I can have a conversation with you about socioeconomic differences and the way that I grew up and the way that I live now, about being a veteran, whether I was a freedom fighter or whether I was the terrorist. It depends on which country you ask. Was I the hero or was I the villain? Again, depend on the story and who's telling it. So for me, I don't really get into the us versus them,
No,
other than the
I,
us alive, us alive, us alive versus,
yeah, obviously, every answer and every question of any inequity or suffering comes back to who you are and getting a deeper understanding of that. I mean, how could you be secure or be beyond fear if you were if there was if you had any other feeling uh
Oh
in
my God, that's a machine.
you have something to say, Anna? No. Okay.
No, I think she was coming into the room
Okay.
and
Okay. So Amy, since Rob has put in a very big let's hear from voice, why don't you just go ahead and say if anything that comes to your mind.
You know, I just sort of stumbled in here. I was really intrigued by the topic and really came in to listen. But I'm really liking the topic. I'm pretty new to the three principles. About 8 months. I've been going to heartfelt presence and lots of talks and things like that. And yeah, I it's such a good question. And you know, I've really been exploring the question of you know, my identity and who I really am and that kind of thing. My past experience in spiritual communities is I walk into the room and I immediately look to see if there are other people of color there, you know, and I do that, you know, with 3P stuff too, and catching myself like you know, when I'm in a Zoom room and that kind of thing. And I like this, you know, coming back to really knowing who I am and really identifying with the truth of who I am, and that race isn't an issue. And but you know, I like I said, this is just, I just kind of stumbled in here, and I'm just really open to hearing this conversation. So thank you.
Well, you bring up an interesting question. I'll ask the question that I think you were asking, and that is, every answer is going inside yourself, and when you are experiencing that spiritual reality, of course, there is no, you don't have any problems with people being this or that. You're basically operating out of love or energy, and that is guiding you in your life. But in the reality of who you are, there's also what you see. honestly see, like in inequities and injustice. So I'll use Sid as an example again. When Sid was doing his business, which is his talks, he kept everything on a neutral level. But when you knew him as a friend, a personal friend, not a business friend, but a personal friend, there's a big difference, Rob. Really big difference. Not even close that they're the same. And he would have a lot of opinions that upset him about where 3P was going, the way of the world, and so on. And that was part of his investigation into clearing his mind and seeing the truth of the situation. So part of what I've seen of like who I am, like who am I in relationship to 3PGC? Who am I in relationship to the indigenous community and so on, and what I'm dealing with, as the only shaman type guy, white guy who's doing ceremony and stuff like that, where I think, Rob, you have to look at those questions too, to find a piece of a piece. Because if I'm upset, example of what 3PGC is doing, I'm not going to be able to see the positive contributions that they do. Yet I don't want to deny the inequities and their failures as well. I mean, it's always good to sugarcoat everything, I call it. But the reality is out. It is a world of inequity rather than equity.
I mean, I get it. I think what I love is the freedom for everybody to express it the way that they feel appropriate. Because for me, the way I learned to communicate, I learned that violence was an amicable way to communicate. So if we couldn't just get the words down, then violently I would get you to see my point. So that made sense to me. So it never was far from my mind that engaged in any argument or discussion I would ever be in, that fighting would be part of it. Like it was always on the table. And fighting would happen mostly when my emotions got high, when they ran high. And so the closer and closer I get to, okay, well, I'm about to fight, I'm at no point listening, the discussion's over. So for me, I started looking at, here's the way. I started saying, Amy. I see Amy, and Amy goes, Rob, oh my God, I am starving. Like, Rob, I'm starving. And I'm like, oh shit, Amy, okay. I got a to-go box from my lunch in the car at this nice restaurant up the road. And she's like, oh yes, I would love it. And so I run to my car and I bring Amy back this to-go box. And she opens the to-go box. And inside the to-go box is a piece of protein. I don't know if she's vegetarian or not, so I don't want to offend you, but a piece of fish or something, right? Some pasta, some good food. That's at the bottom of the tray. On top of that food is the napkin that I used to wipe my mouth and my hands with when I was eating it. It's also a cigarette butt from the cigarette butt I smoked and put on in there too. And there's also my finished Diet Coke can, the other trash on top too, that I've closed in it. And then I give that to her. Now, inside of that container, and Annie, I'm going to ask you, and you could be totally honest, do you eat that food?
No.
Okay. Now, you are starving. And there is food in there, but you can't get past the trash that was put on top of it. So delivery does matter. So if I am talking about moving the conscious level of someone with something that's as trashy and as toxic as racism, delivery matters. Delivery matters. So I can't be out here gung-ho want to, Harry, you made a mistake. You MFer, you Harry, you made a mistake. That ain't gonna ever move Harry to the point of seeing that he made a mistake. So I do get holding people accountable, but I do believe delivery matters. And if my overall goal is to end the human suffering and to get people to seeing their biases within themselves, because I got my own, then that's my job. It's not to keep fighting them about having their bias, because I got mine. It's to open them up to what I'm opening myself up to. The possibility that we can live past it, through it, underneath it, beneath it, without it. So.
Well, you bring up this delivery is so important. I love the feeling you shared with that, Rob, by the way, because we're a global unit, one person, one thought. All life is just one thought.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to share positive feelings because that's the way that it works.
Yeah.
And if we get caught up in our subjective opinions and thinking to the point where it dominates, we know that leads to mental illness or dysfunctionality.
Yeah.
So delivery, I'm just supporting what you're saying. I'm not really making a statement, but delivery, delivery is really important because we're all part of the team.
Yeah.
And the team really is, Amy, the Sid Banks team. We're all part of the Sid. There was one person who has a level of consciousness that was pointing to thought, universal thought. And that's the origin of everything and the continuation. And I see that as it is always one thought. Rob says something, then Amy's, it's still the continuation of the same thought, except we see it a little bit differently, but doesn't change the dynamic of this delivery. And when the delivery is right, if it comes from the right perspective, you disagree with the person, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
And that's the part that I think is really, really interesting. You can disagree and be right in your disagreement, but it's still not good enough if you don't become part of. You have to be part of to lift up that feeling. And within
sometimes I think, Harry, and you tell me what you think. Sometimes I also think that when we hear the problem or when we hear those terms invoke such a feeling that it already is just scary to even see it and want to talk about. Like when you think about racism, people go, oh, like it's just the topic in itself. The name on it brings a whole lot of weight to the table when we're trying to have a conversation of moving us forward on it.
It's true, but those, like when I was heavily into the field of addiction, that's had the same connotation. Ooh, and the first thing I did when I walked into the group of people, I yelled out, "Lighten up!" It's like it's so heavy in here. It's incredible. Like I know it's a serious topic, but we don't have to take it so seriously.
And I believe that's how it settles, though, because we don't take it as seriously. Like we break it up because it's hard as hell. It's almost like a wooden plank you're trying to digest. But if I could soften it, at least make some of it digestible in small pieces, or whatever, then at some point, okay, I can get a feel for this. I can move with this. We could shift.
Yeah, we could either small pieces or avoid certain topics. I'm going to just bring it to the Muslim Jewish world because the show has that flavor to it, the Muslim flavor. My sister is an amazingly beautiful human being, but all Muslims are losers in her mind.
Yeah.
And to me, it shrieks of I just can't stand it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and she's ultra conservative, really pro-Trump and pro. Every time we got into Muslim, Jewish discussion or Trump versus I'm exactly the other side of the fence,
Uh-huh.
we got into ugly feelings.
Yeah.
And then I would think in my head, Rob, how I could beat her, how I could prove to her that she was wrong.
Yeah.
And then we'd get together and it would just, nothing would happen except more hate.
Yeah.
I don't hate my sister. I love my
Yeah.
sister. Honestly, love her.
No, I get it.
But when those topics came up, the
Yeah.
level of consciousness went down so low
Yeah.
that we made an agreement. We will not talk about those things because we cannot have that. And another thing that happened, which was really
I want
interesting.
to ask you a question on that, Harry.
Okay, go ahead.
Does your sister know the principles?
No, she does, but she knows love.
She knows love. Okay. Okay.
And she has a beautiful life. Oh,
no, I didn't freeze. I'm freeze. I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I'm trying to phrase the question. How does a person who understands life is created from the inside out experience the same thing when it's happening to someone who sees life from outside in? Not that there's a responsibility or earnest, but like I've watched you for years teach consciousness. Like you're a magnificent facilitator of love, of oneness, of mind, thought, consciousness as a student of SID or whatever. So I mean that's a real question of how do you not be able to have the conversation? I see why your sister may not.
Well,
but how? Because she's, it's her thinking. It's where she thinks. Like that because it's what you teach, is what you facilitate.
Yes, it's also seeing what works, Rob.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like with your kids, do you have a conversation about the 3 principles and how you should think? Well, I tried that, Rob. It didn't work.
Yeah, no. Now my conversation with my brother where I'm from, I said to my brother, yo, I want to talk to you about these. Man, I learned about these 3 principles. Now, again, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I was born and raised in the projects there. My brother was like, man, listen, you can take that big word shit them white folks teach you, go on back. You can go on with that shit. Yeah. That was his response to me. So it was like, okay. So I know 3 principles. The term isn't my way to talk to my brother, right? So what I did was my brother loves music.
That's it. That's the answer.
Teach me how to do music. And we started going through music. And what I learned through that, though, here's what was interesting. I learned why our relationship was so volatile or so unbalanced for so many years. And it was because I was trying to be his father. And that wasn't my role. My role was to be his brother. And the moment I woke up to being his brother, we never argued again. Because it didn't matter he was a gangbanger. Because it didn't matter I was a soldier. The stories also now were just the same. See, that was a part of our struggle. In our family, I was the kid who was the law enforcement agent and the U.S. military soldier who's doing great things, and he's a gangbanger and a drug dealer. So he carried his gun every day. I carried my gun every day. He would shoot you for his colors, and I would shoot you for mine. But I was a hero. He was a villain. And then I remember it hitting me that if either one of us died, my mom was not going to look at those stories and give a damn. She was going to suffer for the loss of a child. And it was like, oh, I made up you're bad, I'm good. I made that up. I put that barrier in between us that has slowed down the facilitation of you just experiencing my love for a little brother. because that's what you do to little brothers. You just love them because they're your freaking little brothers. Like, you just love them, you know? And when that failed for me, and he started teaching me music, we no longer stay in the projects. He has had a job for a year and a half now. And from what I'm hearing from everybody around, he really does not bang, and he is out of the gang and drug dealing life. And that's been within the time I didn't came into the principles and try to share it with so-called most family people I know. But it wasn't by saying anything. It
See,
wasn't by saying
that's a story Sid Banks would tell. That's the message. That sharing of spirit, that sharing of listening, that share. See, it's not their story. I have the same story with my sister. I stopped caring about the story she was saying, and just cared about the love that we feel for each other. And she's had the same type of experience. But the way you shared that story, that's how you change people. You find the way that works, not the way you think you have to talk about the person. That's you defending your own belief system.
Yeah.
You have to give up your belief system in 3P to be in 3P. And it's not in 3P, it's in spirit or in love, or whatever word you want to use. So when I stopped seeing her for her story, the connection was there. And that came from both of us, because she also wanted to have that feeling with us, and we've blossomed from that thing. And I take that same with my kids, with everybody. They are not their story. There's something before the story. And and so Sid would, that story that you just told about your brother, Sid would kiss, because it shows the way it works rather than talking about it. And he always would say, stop talking awareness.
And just go.
You know, because your brother, and you know what else happened? Anna, we're going to let you come in a second. Okay.
I was like, no. That's a beautiful dog. I see she's got a beautiful dog jumping over it.
The one other thing that happened, Rob, was that for the first time in my whole life, I saw the wisdom of the ultra-conservative people, her point of view. Because when I got out of the story and how it contradicts, and I want to, I actually heard, and I said, yeah, we need conservative people. Obviously, we need to take care of our money and, the material things of life. She has a point. And before, all I saw was she had no point. And then I want to emphasize this, and then I'm going to when you hear somebody has a point, your level of respect automatically in me, because I'm prejudiced. See, it's still a prejudice. I'm prejudiced, and all of a sudden I said, oh, actually, that's kind of cool what she's saying.
And here's what's so funny about that is here's my experience of why I think it's cool. Because if your sister isn't able to be, that means all my friends died for nothing. Because we didn't fight to say you got to choose this right. We fought for the right for you to choose whether you wanted to be whatever political affiliation. So see, for me, I don't get caught in it's almost like fighting my kids. How am I going to fight my kids? I fought for both of y'all. I've lost friends. I've buried friends for both sides because it's collectively the United States of America. So it's, to me, picking a side is again almost telling which one of my kids am I going to say I'm not going to protect you.
Yeah, and it brings to heart. It doesn't matter whether your kids are gay or they're this.
None of that. Again,
as a parent, who cares?
None of that. That's when it doesn't. That's when it's the moment where you really wake up to it. And sometimes it takes a minute, but you always wake up to it. And here's, well, I ain't gonna say always, I'll say what my experience has been. I've lived a portion of my life where I knew something was true, and because it didn't appear outside, I then just went back to living externally through it and just was like, screw it. And tried to suppress. And that didn't make anybody around me change. To them, they was like, oh, okay, well, he's just like us. So it must not have been true. And then when this hit me, I couldn't live any other way but by the truth. No matter if whatever conflict or tension it created, again, with my family my wife is white. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. My aunts march and trying to get civil rights. I got an uncle who I believe was a Panther. Like, it's very, very, very Black Power-ish family. I'm now going into year 8 of being with my wife. We haven't been married 8, but we've been together 7, 8 years. Just last month.
Just
my
like,
grandma.
sorry?
Just last month.
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah.
Last month, my grandmother calls me. And she is the person who, my mom had me very young. So my grandmother raised me for a large portion of my formative years. So she's who in my mind, I go to as mom, because and then me and my mother have more of a brother-sister relationship because we're very close in age. My grandmother called me and she said, what's her name? What's her name? We're going on year 8, Harry. What's her name? And I said, it's Lori, Ma. She says, well, tell her I love her because I've never seen a smile bigger on your face than since you've been with her. And I said, okay. And that was it. Now, that's somebody who was born and raised in a time where the tension of racism, never would anybody ever thought she would have gotten around to the point to acknowledging or having that moment. My father, I think he was way on board early, but he said to me just this year, it's like, man, I really learned something from watching you and her. Like, all white people aren't evil. And I'm like, no. But a whole bunch of them around where I grew up were. But that wasn't everybody. And so I stayed to the truth. I didn't shape my experience. I stayed to the truth. And now everybody around me is beginning to wake up to it because it stands. We don't have arguments about certain things. So just don't argue anymore. Because you're free to believe what you want to believe. You're only going to get from me the feeling of, I hope you just understand you're making your choice to suffer. If you're not, then go live and go be great. Because after that, it's all up for play. It's the I am, the unbroken, the I am, the God in all of us, the uncontaminated. Everything else after that is part of the illusion. I am Black. Okay, that's part of the thought. Identity, how I created myself to be. I am rich. Again, I am is true. Rich, part of the illusion. Oh, that's how I identify. That socially means this. It's the difference in unity and uniformity, so to speak. Uniformity is when things appear the same. That's what the military was. The military I thought was unity. No, it's uniformity. Everybody looks the same, but there's a million different beliefs populating. Unity is when it's one belief, but it populates a million different ways. That's the difference.
And it makes the restaurants better. It makes
Everything.
life more
If
interesting.
the bartenders are happy. Like, I mean, it's just the car salesman ain't cheating you no more. Like, everybody's just happy. Like, you see yourself. Your voice gets put in. You feel included. You were a what do you call it? It's kind of like part of the system. If I feel like I'm part of the system, I'll take my bumps and bruises accordingly. If I feel like I'm a part of it, but man, don't make me take bumps and bruises and then still not feel like I could be a part of the team. You know, all voices, every unique experience, every person experience is all relevant to us pointing to truth. It's all relevant. Every person.
And we all live in separate realities. And with regards to that, Anna, I had a very unusual experience when I was in my early 20s. I lived in Denmark, and the Scandinavian people think basically the opposite of what Americans think, and Canadians, because Canadians and Americans have a similarity and limit, like kind of like this perspective, in my opinion. They're not worldly, and Europeans are much more worldly. And so I would have a discussion in Denmark, and we would start at the same point, and they logically, 100% logically, would arrive here, and I 100% logically would end up here in the opposite thing. Both were logical, 100, but we ended up in different places. Blew my mind. I thought logic meant my one way of thinking.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It just, you people, and where they ended up, many times I liked better than where I ended up. They had a feeling of tolerance. North Americans have no tolerance. They believe if a political or anything should be for their benefit. Well, the Danish think that if somebody if somebody's living a life that they oppose, they still think the government should support it. Because as Rob says, they're entitled to the freedom to choose whatever life they want. Well, I said, that's exactly how I feel. And it changed me. It washed over me. Tolerance was, I liked tolerance. I didn't like always my opinion is the way to think, even though I was adamant about it and fought it. It was so earth shattering.
Oh yeah, mine was similar to that, of waking up to, I'd finally put distance between me fully knowing 100% I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. Like I'd finally got enough of a gap in between to see when things get rocky for me. It was like it wasn't big though. It was like just enough to see like, oh, when I started thinking about identity. So if you ask somebody who they are, first thing they're probably going to tell you is one of the different ways they identify. So they'll say, I am black. And so depending on whatever story you have of black, now you're starting to shape them. And then they go, I am a CEO. And whatever you think of CEOs, you start to shape them. And then you keep on with the differences. I'm married. That means something. I'm a father. That means something. And at the end of them telling you all the different ways they identify, you then come up with this sculpture of who you believe they are. Right? And they're right there in front of you, almost like an avatar. And you just watch it. Right? I remember learning that if I am love and light at my core and connected to mine, that it didn't matter how I identify, that must come through. So for me, the identification part doesn't matter because I know we exist before that. So I'm free to love every expression of identity you can even think of possibly having for your experience. Like I don't have to agree with it because it's not part of mine. But if you could come up with a different way to experience life, I'm like, go for it. Like, woo-wee. Tell me about that shit, man. Like, just think about that. You came up with a totally different way to identify and creating a human experience in life. That's genius. That's genius.
And it touches us.